everybody. Welcome to the Big Picture Manatee, another episode with my friends and colleagues here. I'm Sherry Courier, former county administrator and proud private business owner.
Arrive alive in 2025. My name is Reggie Bellamy, former county commissioner of District 2 and the executive director of the Palmetto Youth Center, proud veteran, and I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, me too. My name is Misty Servia, and I am also a former county commissioner for District 4. I am an urban planner, and I'm also happy to be here.
So we always introduce ourselves at the beginning of the Big Picture Manatee because we have new people watching the show from time to time. Almost every episode, we get some sort of feedback about someone new. And we're here because they always mention how they are engaged and educated, and they learn about important issues in Manatee County. So we've got one here today that we're going to talk about that is, we all three have differing opinions about this. And this is about the discussion that's being had at our county commissioner level about a moratorium on new building and permitting and some things around that. So, I mean, I'm lucky to have the experts here with me, and then a little bit of past knowledge about when some of this stuff might have come up before. But you guys, now this has come up. We have a new board, and we've had 3 storms this past, 4 to 5 months ago in 2024, and some really crazy things happened. And so all of a sudden now there's a rush to do something about it. So, who wants to talk first about this particular subject? Because I think we can really get into some deep details.
Well, the reason why I want to start is because I'm thinking about Robonia and the decades that Robonia has been neglected, and some of the other areas in District 2 that has been neglected because of stormwater. And the conversation, why it's a high point right now in my mindset, it's a little bit delayed. And the reality of it is, did Hurricane Debbie bring this conversation up? I'm just asking. And the reason why I'm asking, of course, we have been dealing with traffic issues for a while, and that's because of the rapid growth of Manatee County. And I would venture to say, being 6 generations deep from the Bellamys and how long that we've been here, some people that are, asking or requesting and everything like that, it's very, very, very concerning that this is here now where we are, and they're putting it on the traffic. But we know our traffic is because our growth in our community, and people are very frustrated. But a lot of those people that are traveling from east to west or west to east, that are part of the growth, 35 to 40 years ago, that's another issue. And some of them are new here. And welcome to Manatee County. We are excited about that, But my concerns is, what are we doing with the moratorium? And I know that it brings upon infrastructure concerns. I know that it brings about environmental protection, and then it's obviously the zoning. There's some part out there about the public, health and safety and everything like that. However, there's a reality of the legal challenges that's going to come place, and it's clear that this current commission, is somewhat divided on this. They're somewhat divided on it, and my position. I read in the article where Rex Jensen was actually said, "Hey, let's sit down and talk about it, and let's build, a collaboration." And I think that's important. But my biggest concern is, we have had stormwater drainage issues, in certain communities, for an extensive amount of time, and I don't think this was a secret. I don't think it was a secret, but now all of a sudden, it's out in front of us, and we have to deal with it. Yes, we do, but let's deal with it over the entire county. That's just me for right now. I'm sorry.
No, good comments. To me, that word moratorium is a really scary word because it has a lot that comes along with it. Once a community starts a moratorium, I think everybody needs to be aware of what that means. There's a lot of bad things that can happen, but I got to say this, I don't know Commissioner McCann. I have never met him face to face. But I appreciate that he has invited the development community to come and talk to him because he's looking for solutions. He has been the one that's been suggesting a moratorium, but I heard him personally invite all the big developers who are doing a lot of the work here to come and talk to him and tell him what's another solution. I'd like to know if they took him up on that. I don't know if they have. Um, but yeah, moratorium's a scary word because I know that there are a lot of legal requirements for imposing one. I think you have to have a beginning date and an ending date, and you have to be very specific on what it means. Think about what a moratorium would mean to our economy, to the people who live here. I mean, yeah, it would slow down construction and building, which everyone seems very concerned about. But when you drill down to the lives it's going to impact, there are a lot of people that are going to be impacted. So for me, I think about, what are different things that we could do. And I know there's been a moratorium discussed in other communities just on single family homes. And I don't know if how that played out. I know that you can do a moratorium in just one district or not just countywide. I think in Hillsborough, they did it in Waimama for a short time. But here's what I say, if we would just follow the rules that we laid out, we would have some pretty solid development. I'm working now in DeSoto County, and I can't tell you how many times I think back to the really good regulations that were or are in place in Manatee County. I'm pretty proud that we've done a really good job. They just haven't been completely implemented or executed the way that they were intended, in my opinion. So I'm happy this board has got back to reversing the wetland decision. That's great. I hope they go back and talk about holding that FDAB line, because that's going to help for smart development. What about the stormwater fee that we all talked about? Reggie, you and I were on the commission. Sherry was the administrator at the time. Nobody likes a new fee, right? I don't want a new fee, but let me tell you, we have stormwater deficiencies and somebody's got to pay for it. But that was, that went away too, because you had a lot of people saying, well, we already have stormwater ponds and, we already do everything. I heard people in Lakewood Ranch felt that way and others. Well, we've got stormwater ponds where I live too. But you know what they do? They treat the water and then they release it and it heads west. So everything moves west, whether, you like it or not. So yeah, we got to start doing some things that were already in place. I think that would probably serve us better, and I think this board is headed that way, rather than maybe going moratorium. What do you think, Sherry?
Well, isn't it really sad that it took 3 hurricanes in a what 4 or 3 big storms, let's put it that way, in a like a 4-month period for people to say, well, maybe we didn't implement the stormwater fee, and maybe we should have done things like that. But what I'm happy about is that it's so unfortunate to say that's there's a study for that. We don't need to go back and do one. They just need to go look at it and get comfortable with the fees, and if they want to change them, they change them, but don't mess around. You've already had these storms that have happened to validate that you need something to help do that. And, I think what is my opinion is everything needs to be in balance. You shouldn't be building only roads. You shouldn't be doing only stormwater. You shouldn't be building only houses. You shouldn't not be putting impact things. I mean, you need a balance, and we're out of balance. So I'm all in favor of whatever it takes to get in balance. But when I see, this discussion about rewriting the comprehensive plan and rewriting the land development code, I mean, how many times have we talked about that, and prior boards have talked about that? And I mean, it takes time, it takes effort, it takes an understanding, and there's a certain group of people that are going to fight every single thing you're wanting to do there. So there must be a reason for that, right? Because it's going to get in their way. And so I'm in favor of, as you both are mentioning, bring the people together, but don't take too long. Bring them together, come up with some compromises and implement them, even if they're small ones. Small wins are better than no wins at all. And so that the community and the people that are impacted in Rabonia and out on the beaches and just inland from there, and the people in Lakewood Ranch and the people out here in Parish know that you are actually addressing the issues and you're doing something. I mean, June is going to be here before we know it, and that's the start of hurricane season again. And who's to say we're in good shape? Nobody, right? So I'm all in favor of looking at it. I wouldn't have the thoughts of ruling it out if it had the right parameters and it was temporary or short term and then reevaluated, because something really does have to be done.
The only thing I'm thinking is we don't need to think and take and throw a word out, right?
Right.
And cast a net to get things done. I think as the leadership move forward, allow leadership to lead. And what I mean by that, leadership has a responsibility of listening. And what I mean by listening, you can't just throw that word out and then don't allow the developers to come to the table. And
right.
when anybody, and this may get me in trouble for later on down the road, but when you start throwing rocks at development, the next time you go to Ruth Chris or any other restaurant that you love, that's part of development. When you go to university, the UTC, the University Town Center, that's part of development. But you know what? More importantly, that's impacting the economic base. That's giving jobs. That's impacting the tight space. So to just stop everything. What about the service workers? What about the AC people? What about the plumbers? My dad was an electrician for 50-some years. What would that do to the electrician? All of a sudden, all these plans, as far as development, and you're contracted with a developer, now all of a sudden, work has to stop. And I think we need to think that out. And then the legal specifics of it, when you start talking about annexations and things like that, this is stuff that I kind of researched, talking about the voluntary and involuntary moves that could potentially be made when you're talking about a moratorium. How about we pause and say, hey, what about Habitat for Humanities, right? What about the veterans home projects and everything like that are out there, because we have people that have served our country, right? That are sleeping on the streets and looking for somewhere. So you throw this mass word out there, and say we're just gonna stop everything for a year. Lives still have to take place. I mean, lives still have to live. And I just think just looking at that. But here's a couple of things that I want to kind of, make a thought. The reality of the building moratorium is that the Senate Bill 250, right? If you're within 100 miles, of Hurricane Ian and Nicole, right? You can't even talk about a moratorium. And contrary to popular belief, just me doing my little work, one hit in Punta Gorda, and that's about 65 miles, and one hit in Fort Miles, that's about 94, 95 miles, from Manatee County. So we fall in that umbrella. And I think the commissioner said he's gonna, challenge that to see what impacts that it had, in those specific districts. And I'm not necessarily sure what that people were missed, because there was some impact on all those, on both of those storms. But then here's something else that I want to make sure that's coming up next week. and that's the independent investigation that's coming out about Hurricane Debbie. And I think that's very, very important. And they're supposed to be discussed, I think next Wednesday on the 19th. But when all that taken and all that discussion comes back, if you want change, and you want things to be done a little bit different, that word fee is gonna come up. It's got to come up, and a stormwater impact fee is gonna come up, and we're gonna have to take and look at that. Not we, the leaders, the commissioners are gonna have to look at that. They're gonna have to hear from us because we're constituents and things like that. But there's a reality of the concerns that you have with the stormwater and the impact fees, but here's one thing that I do know. As far as previously, from what I understand, money was taken, from the stormwater maintenance activities, as far as making sure everything was maintained, and that's a domino effect of problem, especially when you have 2 or 3 named hurricanes that's coming through. I am concerned about that. So just the one mass word, I think we need to look at that strategically, but I do think the brain trust, with some of the commissioners that are up there, they have the right mindset to address it, but we need to make sure we have the right people at the table. And when you get the right people at the table, everybody needs to have the right mindset, and it's to benefit and make Manatee County as great as it possibly can be.
Yeah, great thoughts, you guys. I like to hear all of that. Yeah. And I think that I feel that's what this board is doing mostly, is trying to find solutions. And if a moratorium is imposed, I do hope that it is done as Sherry and you have said too, Reggie. I mean, very precisely with a plan before you do it of what we're going to accomplish, because just pausing development is not going to solve problems. We got a lot of problems to go through on the little checklist. But I think we don't necessarily need a moratorium in my mind if we can get everybody to the table and talk about how things have to change, because we do need something to change. We can't keep going at this pace. Our infrastructure is failing. So that's not a solution. And storms are getting more intense. And the science shows us that that is not going to slow down. Whether you believe the science or not, you'll just experience it because sea levels are rising and storms are going to be intense. So what are we going to do to protect people, their lives, and their assets? Um, and when I think about traffic too, I always think about Jerome Goskowski. Sherry, I know you remember him. I don't know,
Yep.
Reggie, if you ever met him. He taught me this, he did transportation work with the planning department and with public works. And he taught me traffic needs to flow through the roadway network like water through a sieve. You need to have many, many, many different ways for people to go. And he kept saying that over and over and over in the late 80s and the early 90s when I first started working for Manatee County. And guess what we were doing? We were approving development out east that did not flow like water through a sieve. There were State Road 70 and State Road 64 and lots of gated communities, and that is what people wanted, and that is what got approved, and that is contributing to the congestion. And so now, how do we fix it? It's a big problem, but there are ways. Bringing mixed use, bringing more, uses within your little circle of where you live so people don't have to drive as far. So I'm really optimistic about this board. I think they're going to come up with some great ideas. What do you think, Sherry?
Well, I do too. What I can say is I know they're not afraid to bring up ideas. I think we've seen that, and that's a good thing because, as you guys know, you're one of 7 people on the board, and you only can discuss things at the dais because of the sunshine law. So, I've heard some people complaining about the time that this particular new board has spent on the dais, and honestly, it's a good thing to say, but being with the county for over 30 years, I can remember the board meeting one whole day adjourning and coming back and meeting on a whole second day with an agenda. So I mean, I think it depends on what, you know, the topic is, and just having, knowing that they're new and they're talking it out and they're bringing things up, I think is positive, like you're saying. And you know, they're hearing from their constituents, and I think everyone should be super proud of these new folks that they are bringing forward what they're hearing from their constituents. Now, once you get the experts in the room and you start really hearing about the impacts and what's going on, then some things, you know, some things can be done, some things can't. But I mean, Reggie, when you talk about Rivonia, I mean, for how many years, you know, we've worked on stormwater down there, and it takes a long time. When I go on I-75 now and I see the overpass for 44th being built and going over, you know, all I can think of is we're getting there, but how long has that taken? Because that's going to be a whole nother route in, a whole nother route out. You know, surely that's going to make things better. That's what the plan was. But you know, there's so many little intricacies about this particular topic, and I just think that you know, again, I hope there's not too much delay in getting some things started, because unless you do start them, you know, you'll never get there when you think about how long it takes to do things, especially as a commissioner, because I am sure there are things that you guys started that still that are in the capital improvement plan that might be underway, but they're still not done, right? So the, you know, things take time, but I am all in favor of making sure that everything's transparent, that everyone's given a voice, and then the people that are in charge and the experts that are working with them have to be held accountable for what they're doing. And I think it sounds like there's an awful lot to get through on this topic before it could really even gain a, you know, the 4 votes it would need at a minimum. So or 5. Did they vote on that? I'm sorry. Did they vote on the, you got to have a super majority?
No, that's a good question.
We need to come back and talk about that, don't we?
Right. I do. Go ahead, Misty. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, I heard it brought up, but I haven't not heard that was approved, but that's a good question.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's another strategy, right? That you have more people on board, but yeah.
So I guess my thing is the traffic issues that we have right now in 2025, right? They didn't start today. So one, you know, cast net moratorium is not going to end it. That's going to take a lot of work, right? The stormwater issues that we have right now in 2025, it didn't start today, you know, because, you know, some areas maintenance may or may not have been, you know, neglected. You know, there are a lot of things that may or may not have taken place the accurate way, you know, with development. Some of that development, you know, the county has a responsibility, as well as does the development. You know, a lot of that is where we come, where these minds need to consistently be at the table. The one thing that comes up is the timeline. I mean, even if you take some of the bullet points that come out as far as a stormwater code update, you know, what's the time is it going to take us to get that accomplished? The same thing with the entire comprehensive plan update. You know, those little bullet points, when we sit and you look at the things that have been outlined, you know, you need to put a timeline of these things and continue to massage them to assure that the county is going in the right direction. But when that massaging takes place, you know, that's not going to be a 60 or 90 minute massage. One thing that I'm listening to you saying, sir, they may have to think on how these meetings take place. It may not be a meeting where you go and you talk about it a month later or 7 to 10 days later. Maybe this issue is something that needs to be considered consecutive days, you know, where you're talking about the small intricacies when you talk about the stormwater code update. That's a lot of conversation. And it's not going to be held with one particular meeting or a work session and all the information that you need in order for you to make an informed decision. There's a lot of work that's going to have to take place to this. But the other timeline, like you just said, I mean, June is right around the corner, and we're still recovering from last year's hurricane. We're still recovering. So I think we have a lot of responsibility in front of us, but I think we need to approach it collectively and immediately.
Well said.
Right. Yeah, I'll just end with my comments by saying there are some really good professionals who work for Manatee County that haven't left yet. You know, I think about Tom Gerstenberger, who has been there so long. He's such a good stormwater engineer, and I think Ken Cohn is still there. And I mean, those guys, they know what the problems are and they know how to fix them. And I remember 5 years ago hearing their ideas for fixing them, but that was not, that was not felt to be the right thing, and it may have cost the developers too much money to implement. So it did not go forward. But there are ways to fix the problems we have. What did Commissioner Johnson teach us? The answer is money.
All
Now
right.
tell me the question.
Right.
Some-
And I
some
can go ahead. Yeah.
money. I mean, you don't just always throw money at it, but these improvements are going to cost money.
And I'll close out the episode with saying this is that that we went around and we did 8, I think, public meetings about the potential stormwater fee with the study information. And I'll guarantee you one thing, there wasn't a developer in the room complaining about the stormwater fee. Their surrogates were there. There were other people there. And those are the people now that are complaining about what happened. So it's okay, people. If you want to turn your voice around and say, hey, maybe some of this was going to be okay because of what you said, Missy. Tom Gerstenberger's still there and Ken Cohn's still there. And, Scott May, our engineer, is there. I mean, they're there to serve all of the health and welfare of all the citizens of Manatee County. And I believe they should be given the respect and the decency of having their, professional opinions with information that's in the industry brought forward. So, and I'll close too with the word balance again. It's like you can't have a bunch of roads and not address stormwater, or you can't address stormwater and not still let people build homes and move down here and support the economy. So again, it's hard. This is a hard job.
Yes, it is.
Everybody, roll up your sleeves, meet, talk about it, like Reggie said, bring the people in, like Missy said, and get some stuff done. It's okay. We want you to, small wins again. So, all right. Well, thanks for listening, everyone, to this particular episode. Again, we're going to have to say we'll be back to talk about what has transpired in the world of the moratorium idea in Manatee County. So thanks for watching. You can always find us on YouTube at the Big Picture Manatee, and where else?
On Facebook, our webpage, the Big Picture Manatee. Please like and follow and share with your friends. We'll talk to you.